Okay, everyone. So introducing our student keynote speaker, Daniëlle Tump. Danielle is currently a research master in both the Cognitive Neuroscience Research Master here in Nijmegen University, of Radboud University, and Artificial Intelligence one. She will be presenting her research that she did as part of the BrainFly project that was in cooperation with the ASA during this event. So for the project, the team was looking for the effect of gravitational changes on brain activity, and they used the brain-computer interface to test this. They even went up in the air during a parabola flight to have the zero gravity surrounding. And as this topic is new for most of us, she's going to tell us everything about it. So please give her a big applause and enjoy.
Well, first of all, welcome everyone. Synapsium, thank you for having me. As Amy already explained, I'm a student in both the master's programs of AI and of cognitive neuroscience. And for me, the perfect combinations were actually brain-computer interfaces. And what these are actually extensions of an EEG system. So I have an EEG system of A&T Neuro right here. And what it does is it actually measures brain signals. And if we have these brain signals, we can actually detect the signals with different kinds of actions. So if you, for example, move your left hand, it will have a different signal than if you move your right hand. And this is actually something that we can use in a brain-computer interface, because a brain-computer interface is actually nothing more than using these brain signals to either move something, let something shoot. Well, you can, for example, turn a lamp on and off, just by detecting the differences between these two. So I actually did a project about this, and I thought, okay, well, that's nice and all, BCI, but let's do it in a really uncommon circumstance. So in this case, I actually did it in zero gravity, which I will tell more about. But first a bit about these brain-computer interfaces, because they sound really cool. They sound kind of futuristic, but they're used way more than, well, most of people think. So for example, you can already play games with it. These are just two people against each other playing Pong, I think it is called, just a bit competitive. Then you have the future of maybe controlling a car by means of these brain signals. It's still in progress. It's not yet on the road, but they're testing it. But these are future possibilities of the systems. And then it's actually not only in a research environment. As you see with the first picture, it was quite dense, just like this one. A lot of effort to put on. So someone at home would have trouble with this. But it's getting more and more to the consumer market. As you can see here, there's less electrodes, but it's already been used. You can play easy games with it, or make a ball float, or move something slightly. But then there's also the big companies that actually try to hype it up. So this, for example, is Facebook, who wants to type by means of these BCI systems. And they believe that this could maybe be the future of controlling our cell phone, or, well, basically providing input to like social media. And of course, there's the big man, Elon Musk, that sees a big future in BCI systems. He actually thinks that it would be better if a chip is implanted in the brain. There's a lot of medical and ethical issues with that, so it might take a while to have that actually done to like a big audience. And he thinks it will be the future with talking, but also making people smarter by training or by maybe even influencing the brain. But this is all pretty futuristic. These are all fun and games. They seem nice, but we can also live without. However, it's also used with people that are already in need of such a system. So, I will come back to that, but first a bit about how it works. So I explained a bit about the measuring of the brain signals. So if we move our left hand, we get a certain brain signal on the right side of our brain. But if we think we move our left hand, we actually get the same signal. So instead of actually moving it, we can actually just think about it. And if we measure this with an EEG system, it will look like this approximately. So we see an activation on the right side of the brain when we move our left hand. And we also see this when we think we move our left hand. And this is really easily detected. It's a specific name for it, sensory motor rhythm, that desynchronizes when you move or think about moving in hand. So in this case, you see that the line's more flat, which could indicate the desynchronization. So a BCI, for example, could classify it as a right hand movement just by measuring the brain signals. So you don't even have to move your hand or anything else. So back to the more real-life applications, the people that actually need it. No? Almost. So what it does is it measures the brain signals, it then pre-processes it, as in it takes out a bit of noise, it takes out the features that we want to detect, because we don't need the whole signal. If we know what to detect, we can just focus on a smaller area of the brain. And then these features that we extracted, we can compare it to the signals that we normally would see if someone, in this case, moves their left or right hand. So we can compare that. And if it looks more like a left hand, then we classify it as a left hand. And if it looks more like a right hand movement, then we classify it as right. And if we put this classification into a game or into a computer, we can actually move it. So in this case, there's arrows, but you can move. Well, we used, for example, cannon that goes left and right. You can actually play a game with it. And then this can happen quite fast, in a few milliseconds to seconds. So it's quite exciting to see. Now we get to the more real-life application. So this is a woman that has, I believe it is ALS, so she can't really move that much of her muscles. She's really deteriorated, she's dependent on other people. And she has these electrodes that you see on this thing, she actually has it implanted in her brain. Not specifically for the BCI, but for medical reasons. But once it's in there, we might as well use it for BCI. So normally she depends on people feeding her, drinking, giving her water, letting her drink. But by means of this BCI system, see? She can actually drink by herself. So the guy in the back is not secretly controlling this. He's just making sure that the robot arm doesn't go all places. So she's doing this herself. It does take some training, as in the computer needs to recognize which brain signals from your brain correspond to which movement or which action you want to take. So she's been probably trained for a long time to actually have this done. But it is possible and it's already applied. Not even alone in this. People with ALS or locked-in syndromes can already type stuff to their relatives or to their loved ones. It is already a thing. So we as a team, Team BrainFly, which is the logo on the right, we thought, okay, well, these people have problems with motor systems. And could there be another application for people that also have problems with this, but then make it better for them? It's not specifically healthcare, but is there another group? So what we then looked at is astronauts. Because if you come back from space, your muscles are all deteriorated. Movement is hard because in zero gravity, you don't really need that much muscle strength. So your muscles kind of give up with, well, not existing, but being as strong. So movement around as an astronaut is also difficult. This would be a problem though, because if you're up in space and you have to repair something outside of the spacecraft, or maybe an inside, or you have to explore on, well, let's say the moon or wherever you are, this will be less accurate because you don't know what your body's going to do. So we thought, okay, can we use a BCI system to have this done for them so they can stay in the spacecraft while controlling, for example, a robot outside of the spacecraft. So what we wanted to research is how well can we control this BCI in microgravity. We also looked at hypergravity, but microgravity was the main aim. So yeah, we're not the first that wondered about this. There is a lot of studies or papers that say, oh yeah, great idea, this could happen, this could work, but they haven't really done the research yet. There's one guy that did this study before us. He found that it was possible that Parabolic Flights can do these stuff, can do the research or can be used for this research. However, he only did it on 2 participants. They didn't have any BCI training, so it was quite iffy if it worked or not. But he did give us a good basis to study further. So we were quite lucky as a team, because the ASA has a competition in which about 10 teams are accepted to do their research for their thesis. Master or PhD students can all apply to do research in microgravity and in hypergravity. And this is by means of the parabolic flights that I mentioned earlier. These parabolic flights look a bit like this. They're done in normal aircrafts. So it's just a regular plane. If you go to, well, wherever, it's the same plane as that we used here. The only exception is that the pilot's a bit extreme. The plane will go up in about 45, 47 degrees. Then you'll feel extra heavy, so you have twice the gravity on your body. Then at the top, it just basically falls. So you're just free floating your microgravity or close to microgravity. And then once you go down again in the same amount of degrees, you feel extra heavy again. This is not just forever. It's about 20 seconds each stage. So you go down, up, down quite quickly. It's only 60 seconds. So we don't just get to do this once. Our plane actually went up and down 31 times. Yes, it's quite cool. We as a team were lucky enough to also be participants in it, so we all did it. But yeah, this is how we wanted to investigate the micro and the hypergravity. We are not the only ones on the plane. There were different experiments because there were about 10 or so from the competition, and then there were some more professional teams. I think there was about, a space parachute for Mars or something tested, and there were lasers, and there were some physics experiments. So there was a lot going on, which was quite cool, because we were there as well with our EEG systems and our BCI things. So to give an impression of the planes, just a short video on the competition. I don't think it has a sound. Yeah, so this was just a regular airplane that you see in the back. Our team was named BrainFly.
If you click on the sound and flip it up again, like in the video itself, it might go.
Yeah, I think I shut down the sound on this. So these were all the different experiments that were done on board, in the same plane as us. So this is actually the rubber hand illusion that's also on display in the experience lab here in ANT, here in Synapsium. Not from the airplane though, but separate experiment. But there were all these kinds of different experiments. It was quite cool to see. We didn't understand them all, of course. But it was nice to be around all these different experiments. So what we did with our BCI is we played a game. So you see on the left, you see the game. So the gray block is actually a cannon. Our first idea was to make it look more fancy, but then we had all these troubles with distractions and everything, so we stuck with this. So the paddle had to be moved left and right by means of the brain signals, and it was shooting out these bullets, which is the white oval. And then the green ones are actually aliens, because we thought we'd stick to the theme. And the goal was to shoot as many aliens as possible and to get your score up as high as possible. And people were trained for this 2 months in advance, twice a week. So it's quite extensive. Also good to mention is we had a total of 3 flights. So we got to do 3 of these parabolic flights. With on each flight we were allowed 3 people. So a total of 9 participants, which was including our team, which is 4 people already. So this is the setup on the right. We were placed in front of a dark screen to limit the noise and everything. And then we sat down in regular airplane seats, EEG cap on, the amplifier and everything belonging to the system was on the belly. Then the laptops were on a table, really strict regulations, so they were basically glued on the table, and then the tables were strapped around the legs. It was a lot of problem to get this setup approved as well, because if something happens to the airplane, we had to run away or I don't know what you're going to do if the airplane goes wrong, but we had to be prepared. So yeah, this was the system. Okay, well, this parabolic flight is actually quite interesting because it's not a different, or it's not a regular environment to do EEG in, or even BCI. Because normally you have in controlled environments, participants sit still because you instruct them to do that. There's no changes in environment while going through the experiment. There's also not a lot of changes in environments from one to the next, so from one training of the BCI to the next. You could check the signals in between. If it really doesn't work, you can do it again. You can check if everything just goes well. You normally do just one participant at a time to limit noise and everything. You have a normal body status. You're not in micro or hypergravity. You're just sitting like you would do at home. And there are hardly any distractions, because normally you're in a Faraday cage or just anything limited. This is quite different from what we experienced, because it's a really uncontrolled environment. First of all, we had 3 participants next to each other, so they had that noise from each other and they were distracted. There were people in the back floating around, yelling, everything. There were other experiments going on. Even the people from the ASA or like the other companies around there were checking if all the rules were correctly followed. So it's quite different than the standard environment. And we had to train our participants in the standard environment in the 2 months prior. So we didn't really know if it would work. Oh, almost. Let's see. Yes. First of all, there was a lot of muscle movement. Because if you're flying around or even like twice as heavy, your muscles kind of go in all directions. So this would show up on the EEG system as well. Then we had a shot of scopolamine. Like I said, we had to go 31 times up and down. I don't know if you ever experienced car sickness, but it's not a nice feeling. So we get the anti-motion sickness drug injected in it. There's also the problem with what it does to the brain. There was one research on it that said that it didn't affect much, but one research is not definite. So, well, we just have to take it for granted. Because if we didn't use this, we might risk that all the participants will get sick, and then we would have nothing in the end. Then weightless and extra heavy. Being extra heavy is not really an experience that anyone encountered. Like, you could do roller coasters and everything, but it's not the same as just being 20 seconds floating around or extra heavy. So that was different. Then there are all these distractions, like I said, from other experiments, from just the yelling, from just the feeling from inside your body, from what you feel when you're weightless. There's also a time limit. We're not the only experiment, so they weren't going to change the flight schedule or any timing aspects of it. The plane had to leave at a certain time. The plane had to do parabolas at a certain time. So we had to stuck through that. If it didn't work, we would have a problem. And also we only had 9 people. It's not really a big, if you're into research, 9 people is not really that much to do significance on, but we had to work with it. And then, of course, there's the excitement and the anxiety that you feel. Especially the first parabola was quite exciting, because you experience something completely different. I at least experienced it as something that I didn't even expect. I thought I would feel it in my stomach or anything. It just felt really, well, whoa, just describe it like that. I can even imagine how it felt now. So this is what the first parabola looked like. We instructed our participants to sit still, but in this case, we couldn't really do that with the first parabola. So they were just task-free to just experience it. And this is, I think, the phase that everyone has at the first parabola. So we didn't use this parabola in the analysis, just a side note. The rest of the parabolas were actually focused. Our participants did really well. They could remain focused to the screen, which also helped against the motion sickness. So that was a good aspect. So this is us. This is actually me. During the flight. So you see the game in the bottom. And we try to control it left or right to shoot these aliens. And you hear in the back, you hear the pilot saying, or counting down. And you also hear the noise from the airplane. And there's also a reaction time task for another experiment, because we all did our thesis on a different subject or topic. So we just had to keep focused. But as you can see, I'm blinking a lot as well, because that's just the experience. And then you see us floating around. We were strapped by belts by the bottom. We couldn't make them more tight because it actually kind of hurts if you're trying to float around. So there was some movement there, and as you can see, there could be muscle movement. And in the back, you can actually see people floating around. We tried to limit this by the black screen, but you can only do as much. Also, due to safety restrictions, we couldn't make it a whole cage because people had to escape. Yeah, it was just a really different experience. You can play it again, maybe. So this was one of the experiments, which is the BCI, but the rest of the team also did research into a different in B300, or I did research also in comparing sleep before the flight and after the flight. I don't know if you're into neuronal replay, but that's what I'm more focused on. So we actually did this game during 26 parabolas, because we sort of promised our participants that if they participate, we couldn't offer them money, they could free float the last 5 parabolas. So that was their motivation to actually do this. It was also quite sad if you can't free float and you see everyone floating around you. But that was quite a cool experience. You see cameras in the back as well. We had to do a lot of interviews and media posts and everything to get this covered, because we got the flights from the ESA, but the rest was up to us. So it was interesting. So our results are really preliminary. We have to do more on them. We have to go deeper into what every signal means. So this is actually sensory motor rhythm that I explained in the beginning a bit. We did a power analysis on it, on the different frequencies that, you could detect. We didn't really notice much so far. It's a really coarse, review of the peaks. We're going to do that, I think, a bit more specific. But actually, the only difference you can see in here is that the peak between pre-flight and flight is different. So nothing with normal gravity or hypergravity. There's a change in peak between pre-flight and post-flight, pre-flight and flight, which has been shown before. We don't really know why, but this is what we can see in the preliminary results. But they are around the sensory motor rhythm, so that's a good sign. Something is happening and it is detected, so it still works. Having this SMR, sensory motor rhythm, does mean that we can, in theory, control the BCI in space or in hypergravity, because it still exists. It doesn't just vanish or go all over the place. It can still be detected, and that it is at the same frequency is only a good thing, because then we can account for it in space. And then based on the BCI, it worked a little bit less than on ground, of course, because you're more focused, you're not floating. So this is also really preliminary, it's just quick results that we got. We do see that in microgravity it works the best, which is also according to theoretical studies and according to the study that has been done before in Parabolic Flights. But there is a bit difference. Like normal gravity is now about, a bit above 50%, so not great. But that's something that we can work on, for example, in the future. So ideally, we want to do this plenty more times. We want to do more participants. We want to adjust our BCI system, because we weren't really able to do it now. We couldn't adjust it to the different gravity levels because we simply didn't know what to expect. So we just had to base it all on what happens on ground. So we would like it to do it again. Might be a bit difficult because we're all done studying and everything, but that would be ideal. Based on this flyer thesis program, maybe you also want to do it. Maybe you want to set this work on They're actually having a call out now for other student projects. It doesn't have to be in neuroscience or anything. Could also be physics, but if you have a good idea, you can still apply and also do these parabolic flights. So I would really do it, but I think you have up to like September to actually hand something in. So maybe an idea if you're looking for something. They also have programs with, I think they have a drop tower or more, or less extreme parabolic flight studies, but you can do research towards different gravity levels. And then these are our sponsors. We needed these sponsors for example, the A&T Neuro gave us the equipment that we used, and they also gave us a lot of help. And then we have the different universities. And our game is actually on display in the experience lab or in the workshop thing, where the game is actually being played by one of the A&T Neuro people. I'll also be around there, so if you have any questions, further questions, you can ask them then, or questions now. Thank you. Questions?
You were pressing a button while playing the game?
Yes.
Why?
We also did a P300 task in which we had to find the accuracy, because we were in a team of 4, so we all had to have different questions, and it was a bit, trying to sort out where it would fit in best. But that was because of that, because we also want to look at the reaction time differences between the gravity levels, and we wanted to do a lot in that certain amount of space. But yeah.
Do you think it might have consequences for your results? That it's better to do less within one experiment?
Yes. We do think it has consequences, because we actually filtered out those segments, so there's less time. Yeah. And we only had, 26 times 20 seconds of microgravity per person. So it did have effect, but it was necessary in our case. So, but it might be in future studies that we just say no. We just do it separately. Yes.
Do you think if long-term exposure to microgravity would influence like the results? For instance, if you go to Mars, would that mean that once you get there, that there would be changes in your brain which would influence the BCI?
I do certainly think so. We haven't really researched that. There are some researches with EEG systems in space that looked a bit at it. They say it changes a bit, but if you have a BCI that adapts itself to previous signals, or like signals that are a bit closer in time to that one, then it might be able, or it's probably able to actually account for that. Because I don't think the SMR vanishes completely, because you're still able to move stuff. It's less accurate. Yes.
Was the BCI more accurate in microgravity than in?
No. It was more accurate than in hypergravity and normal gravity in the flight. But then the normal gravity might also be the anticipation that you have until the hypergravity begins and stuff like that. So we don't know much about that, but we're going to look into that further. We're not done yet. Yes.
So, do you think about training the BCI system in sort of an equally crazy environment? Because then the BCI learns better, and also the brains also adjust to BCIs themselves. So you might have calibrated it better if you had trained it in
Yes.
a turbulent environment.
We thought about that, but it would actually be a better option. But the parabolic flights have a really set time limit, so before that it couldn't really be done. Because I think you have about half an hour, including liftoff and everything, before the first parabola starts. So that would be problematic. But then we could also do it on like regular flights. We thought about that, but that was more a financial and time issue that we couldn't really work that out. But it is a really good point, and we would have liked to do it that way. But we weren't the only experiment on board, so it couldn't really change that. Yes.
Yeah, what was the theory behind the hypothesis that that the BCI changes through lower or reduced growth?
Well, the idea behind it is actually from studies that have been done with, mostly pre-flight scans of the astronauts and post-flight scans. And they do see that the brain changes, and they do see that the muscles get less accurate and just, not as strong. So that's the basic hypothesis behind that. Does that answer your question? We do know that certain areas of the brain change during long exposure in microgravity. So we see that certain areas maybe light up more in certain actions or even change anatomically. So we do know that difference, and we just know that the brain adapts to the environment that it's in. So if it's in an environment in microgravity, for example, it changes so that it can be most functional in that environment. And microgravity is not not normal gravity, so it has to adapt probably quite a lot, but I can't say the exact details on that.
And do you have like these changes that happen in microgravity? Do they point in this direction that it would influence the stars? So were they, for example, in the same brain areas? Or?
Well, we also looked at other active areas, so not only the sensory motor rhythm. Well, it's mostly the vestibular area, of course, because that's the most influenced by the gravity levels. But on 20-second time scale, we don't actually see the real changes that would happen with astronauts, for example. We can only say they might change like this or they might change like that. But we do see other brain signals that change in these second time windows. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through a pitch again. So the idea I got was that obviously in space, when you spend some time in space, your muscles sort of get weaker, and therefore it could be a problem if you need to fix something outside the ISS. So you said you might use a BCI to control the robot or something, but my question was, why wouldn't you just design a controller to control the robot with your thumbs, like with your fingers, in which...
But then you still have to use muscles for that. Even though they're smaller, they might still be different. But it's not only for that, it's also for training, for example, the astronauts to have their brain active in a certain way that you can use BCI for, but that's not part of the program. But like, you're still using muscles. It is a really, well, it's really early to say that it actually can be used. It's just a really basic study to maybe base more studies on and get it further to actually do something like that. But I do agree that it seems easier to have a controller, but also that is changed with controlling it in accuracy. Yes?
You talked about that you need 2 months of training, and I assume that's for the BCI to train.
Yes.
But does the participant also need to train how to influence the system?
So the BCI, let's see if I can have that back. They were mostly trained for the BCI, yes, to have it controlled, because what it does is the brain also, no. This one, the brain also adapts to what it sees. So if it, well, for example, you learn to control your brain the way that the program wants it, but the program also adapts to your brain signal. So it's basically a two-way street. So you, for example, with hand, while moving your hand, we first had to learn the participants how they could do it. So we started with the real movements. They could either use finger tapping or they could just squint. And then they had to slowly go into imagining it because they've never done that before. So just thinking, okay, think about your hand moving, didn't always work. Some started off with a great accuracy, others just had to really learn that through the months. But yeah, you have to adapt to the program, but the program also adapts to you.
So they had to imagine left to right hand movement in order to move the camera.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, you said you also did sleep research, right?
Yes.
You did, with the playback, what was your question there?
Well, my question, I think, is more specifically neuroscience-ish. I did a sleep night before the flights and I did a sleep night after flights. And my theory behind it is more concerning neuronal replay, as it has been shown in animals that someone replays a signal that they had during a learning event during the day, at night, in the sleep after the learning event. However, this is really difficult to prove in humans. So we thought, okay, we also know that the more novel an experience is, the easier it is to be detected in the sleep after, at least in rats. So we thought, okay, well, gravity conditions are quite novel. Maybe we can use that. So that's the theory behind that. But still, also, the results are still coming.
I'd also like to add that if you are a PhD student or you're going to become a PhD student, that you can still apply for these programs, and usually the company then that you want to do a PhD with then maybe gives you half the money that you need, and then ESA sponsors you as well. So it's not only for master students if you want to do something like this.
And you can sign up as a team. You don't have to do it alone. You can mail us for advice if you need anything. But I would definitely advise it. I would do it again if I had the chance. Any other questions? Then thank you.